South Africa has claimed a policy of so-called non-alignment over the war in Ukraine, but at the same time, some have suggested that in reality, it takes the side of Moscow and Vladimir Putin. So why would South Africa support Russia? Welcome to the program. I'm Philip Hampshire. South Africa has been forced to deny accusations by Washington that it provided weapons shipments to Russia. Pretoria has even set up an inquiry into the claims. It all feeds into a view that South Africa remains a steadfast ally to Russia despite the war in Ukraine and claims of neutrality. There are even reports now that South Africa will offer attendees at a BRICS summit in August diplomatic immunity. That's seen as a move that will allow Pretoria to avoid having to arrest Vladimir Putin if he attends under the terms of the ICC's arrest warrant for the Russian president. So why do the two countries appear to be so closely aligned? So to discuss this further, we're joined from Cape Town by Ebrahim Rasool, who's a former South African ambassador to the United States. Meanwhile, in Johannesburg, we have Chris Vandome, who's a senior research fellow with the Chatham House Africa programme. And in Oxford, in the United Kingdom, we have Peter Dwyer, who's a specialist on South African affairs and the editor at the Review of African Political Economy. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Ebrahim, I'm going to start with you if I can. Well, let's attack the premise of the question first of all. Here in the West, the Western newspapers have been saying of South Africa that they've been a little bit too supportive of Russia and not really neutral in the sense that they've been trying to maintain. Do you think that that's a reasonable charge?
I can certainly understand how South Africa has given that impression that it is softer on Russia because it has stayed out of votes, it has abstained from votes that censures Russia. It had a former president that was very close to Vladimir Putin. And I think that the handling in reaction to the allegations by the US ambassador to South Africa alleging that there was a ship that carried arms from South Africa to Russia may have given that kind of impression. My own feeling is that South Africa shares some values with Russia, such as the need for a more inclusive and multilateral world. It may even agree on the reform of the United Nations Security Council. It may even want a de-dollarized world. And it may also have an aversion to an undue extension of NATO. But I think that at heart, South Africa will balance out its interests, which are largely lodged with programs in the United States rather than some of those kind of values, because it has other values as well, such as respecting the sovereign integrity of other sovereign lands, such as that in Ukraine. So I think I understand where the perception comes from. I think South Africa has handled it badly, but I do believe that we will find a balance between our values and our interests, because our interests, if not looked after, could create enormous, greater difficulty in South Africa.
You said you can see where the feeling comes from. Do you think it's a fair feeling, though? Do you think it's a fair charge level at South Africa or not? It's difficult maintaining neutrality and treading that line.
I think all things being equal, it may be a fair charge. I think looking where it comes from, for those who have allowed other invasions, those who have allowed other bypasses of democracy and human rights, I think it becomes unfair in a world where things are dealt with simply by virtue of interests rather than values. But I understand the perception is one that may have taken root in the world.
This is from the State Department of the United States. This is a spokesperson in the State Department called Vedant Patel, and they had this to say.
The U.S. has serious concerns about the docking of a sanctioned Russian cargo vessel at a South African naval port in December of last year. And as good partners do, we have raised those concerns directly with multiple South African officials, and I will leave it at that.
A sort of slightly ominous there, in a sort of we're not angry, we're disappointed kind of a parental tone. What do you think's going on here?
there has been, up to this point, a sense of, we're not angry, we're just disappointed. And I think that has now translated into louder and louder frustration. Earlier on in the year, the US ambassador did take out a piece in the South African newspaper Business Day to explain the position, and there was a lot of demonstration of an old affinity and personal affinity of him with South Africa, with the struggle, the similarities with the civil rights movement in the US, and trying to depict this sense of friendship. And it's built up, and it's gone beyond that now to this kind of megaphone diplomacy, as it's been put, of saying, look, we get it, you want to be neutral, but at the same time, there is a Russian ship that has docked in your military base. We don't know what has been loaded onto it. We don't know what has been loaded off it. We have asked, and as he put it, they have intelligence. There was a suggestion that there is US intelligence saying what happened, although they haven't yet provided any evidence on that. So there is that sense of, as another Western diplomat in Pretoria put it to me, yes, the South Africans are on the fence, but with both feet in the Russian garden. And there is a sense now that military engagement, this isn't just an ideological or an economic relationship, but if this is actually a military relationship, that takes things into a different sphere.
Peter, what do you think the nature of the relationship is between Russia and South Africa? And how does it compare with South Africa's relationship with, I hesitate to say, the West or NATO nations? The United States and its allies is probably the best way to put it.
I would say South Africa has always been a sub-imperial power and it plays a nice role for the US in Africa. And since the end of apartheid, South Africa has been a sort of moral compass for the US in terms of how a country should behave. And so I think it's right to say that it's been disappointed with South Africa's behaviour. And as you said, a bit like sort of parent scolding a naughty child. But South Africa, if it does anything, I think as Ebrahim has alluded to, is that South Africa will act in its own interest here. And I'd characterise that as a sub-imperial power on the continent.
Ebrahim, what do you make of this with regards to South Africa's relationship with Russia? Russia doesn't have an enormous amount of investment in South Africa, whereas the United States does, the UK does, many other European countries do. Even if we look at, say, China, which does have a larger portion of investment in South Africa, it's nothing like the scale of the rest of the West. So how is South Africa positioning itself given those investment disparities?
Look, I think that South Africa had a lapse of concentration, if I can put it like that. I think for a moment they forgot that we have 2,000 products going duty-free to the US under AGOA. We get PEPFAR funds for HIV/AIDS. We have 600 US companies employing almost 200,000 South Africans. And we got carried away with only seeing one part of the equation, which was the NATO part in the Ukraine situation. And Russia is not even in the top 25 trading companies or trading countries with South Africa. So I think it was a lapse of concentration. And I think that what the US ambassador, Ruben Brigitte, did, and I know him personally, he's an academic, he doesn't lose his mind. He was an intended missile to deliver a warning to South Africa, to remind South Africa about all the things that they are dependent on. And spending the last week in Washington and informally, off the record, speaking to people there, they believe that it is almost mission accomplished, that they've fired a warning shot over South Africa's bows, that South Africa has heard it, that the Secretary General of the African National Congress made a distinction between when the ANC speaks and when government speaks. The president has appointed a retired judge, Mojapela, to investigate the Lady R ship and what it was carrying, and that South Africa was assuaging the US and the West, that it can look after its interests as well as its values.
Chris, you're over in Johannesburg. What is the view in South Africa among people that you talk to about the war in Ukraine? And do you think that is what all of this is about? Or is this part of the longer-running BRICS trend and greater cooperation between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think that the overall knowledge and awareness of international affairs in South Africa it doesn't resonate with the public consciousness as much as it does in other countries. This is a country that has its own problems that it is facing. And it's within that context that you've got to kind of see where we are with this, which is that here is an issue on which the government isn't being hammered. The government was being hammered on so many different other issues at the moment, including the energy crisis, the state of the economy, and so many other things that are taking the public consciousness here in South Africa. And here was a seemingly easy position for the government to take, to say, we're not aligning with the West. We see that South Africa benefits from multiple global partnerships, and that anti-imperialist line resonates with people on the ground. So for a long time, this was quite an easy line domestically to take. But as has been pointed out, as the situation has solidified, particularly internationally, and South Africa has been forced to kind of justify that position, it's become more and more difficult. And now there are real economic implications. I don't think that the government foresaw when it first started out on a line of neutrality 18 months ago.
Ebrahim, let me bring this across to you. We've got the BRICS conference that's going to go on in South Africa a little bit later on this year. There was always a question mark over Vladimir Putin attending. Well, first of all, Russia's busy with the war in Ukraine. It might be dangerous for him to take a flight to go to South Africa. Let's not be unreasonable. But also the ICC have issued an arrest warrant for him just a short while ago. That places South Africa in a different position again. South Africa, which is reasonable under normal international ties, said we'll offer him diplomatic immunity, and it's even coming under flak for that. Ebrahim, what do you do if you were asked to advise the government? What do you do with that?
I think I would advise them to do what I think they're doing now, and that is attempt to do either legal or diplomatic gymnastics to prevent Vladimir Putin from actually coming to South Africa. I suspect that that is what is being done behind the scenes, but also in response to the warning shot that the US has fired over the bow, because AGOA comes up for review in 2025. PEPFAR has just had 20 years anniversary and may have to consider whether South Africa still deserves to be in on it. And some major US companies are saying, if we are actually in a country that supports Russia, should we still be here? So I think that it has been ratcheted up significantly for South Africa to find that legal or diplomatic loophole that will allow it not to have to implement the ICC's warrant of arrest for President Putin.
Ebrahim, I think you've got a bird there behind you who is joining in with the conversation very vocally. Let me take this across.
Unfortunately, I think he's reacting to my voice.
Chris, let me bring this across to you. We've got a quote here from Cyril Ramaphosa, his views on this. He had this to say. Our view is that we would like this matter of unfair treatment to be properly discussed, Ramaphosa said. But in the meantime, the governing party has decided once again that there should be a pullout. So that will be a matter that will be taken forward. Cyril Ramaphosa there talking about their relationships with everyone else. Is he in a difficult spot, do you think?
Yeah, he is. Look, in South Africa's agency in international relations in the past has been clear. There have been moments where it has had real influence in shaping global agendas. It used its time, for example, on the UN Security Council previously to strategically vote on issues around Myanmar, for example. It has used UN voting as a way of demonstrating anti-interventionism in airstrikes and air defense on Libya. And it has long been a champion for greater inclusion. So on the one hand, there are cases where South Africa has been what it sets out to be as a champion of issues for the global south. On this, though, we see this conundrum of the party has articulated one thing in terms of its relationship with the ICC, which is that it should stay in. And you have seen a public debate here around, as has been put here, the legal gymnastics. I think really what everybody would rather have is for Vladimir Putin, if he was to participate virtually from Moscow. Now, the issue is that what this is doing is highlighting that where in the past you can see these cases where South Africa has been influential, on this, it almost feels as if there is this other power who is really keen to demonstrate to everybody else, I am not isolated, I have friends, and I have friends in places where you want to have your friends. And so the pressure on Ramaphosa from Moscow, I think, is considerable in wanting to demonstrate and make this point. And it's becoming really hard to continue with those gymnastics.
Peter, let me bring this across to you. Is South Africa Russia's friend?
I'd say it is, definitely. And it's playing itself cleverly, along as I've tried to say with other countries of the global south, of which South Africa is probably the most important one in Africa. And it's using its relationship with Russia to gain maneuver and leverage with the US as well. And that, as I said, this comes at a time of increased rivalry between the US and China, which I think also is a big context for this, which we've not mentioned. I mean, as much as the Western media is obsessed at the moment with the relations between the US and Russia and the war in Ukraine, there is in the background a much bigger rivalry which is growing, and which in a very assertive US is trying to whip up support, including South Africa, which will then is seen as the moral compass in Africa, against growing Chinese influence, which the US sees as its greatest rival now. I mean, for all Russia's the craziness of the war in Ukraine, Russia isn't really the biggest threat to the US imperial power anymore. It's China.
So where does South Africa stand on the sort of US-China axis then? How does it deal? That's an even stickier problem for it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it will also try to maneuver its leverage in that relationship as well. China obviously is a much bigger investor in Africa and also in South Africa, much bigger than Russia. But again, South Africa has to tread carefully. I think the gymnastics is a very useful word, because the US and Europe, who are its allies in NATO, are still by far and away one of the biggest investors in South Africa and in Africa. So the gymnastics will continue without a doubt.
Ebrahim, I'm going to take this across to you because I saw you shake your head there. What was it you didn't like?
Look, the point is that I think that Russia is not so much a friend of South Africa. We have an inherited relationship with the Soviet Union, which included Ukraine. And that's what some South Africans actually forget.
I was actually going to bring this up, but I felt a bit embarrassed to do it because, of course, there are historic Marxist linkages between the ANC and the Soviet Union, but we're going way, way back to the 70s and the 60s here.
But that's the point, and that's the kind of old debates that are being revived in South Africa to justify a harder stance against the United States and jettisoning interests in the interest of so-called old values. So I think that that's the first thing. The second thing is that South Africa has had the dexterity to manage multiple relations. So when we were emerging markets, we were BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But within that circle was another circle of emerging democratic powers, and that was IPSA, India, Brazil, and South Africa. So we were able to balance out our economic interests through BRICS and our ideological values-driven issues through IPSA. And that is what I think the current leadership of both the ANC and South Africa are not managing very well any longer. so that we could say to the US and to the West, here is our economic, we trade this with China, we trade this with Russia, but we are emerging democratic powers and therefore we are aligned. But that has come along, and I agree with Peter and Chris, that South Africa has lost a lot of moral authority in the world because of 10 years of corruption and backsliding on a few key issues that it should never have allowed to backslide. And that is why the US ambassador thought that he could fire that shot against us, because we have diminished moral authority in the world today.
Chris, you're in agreement with that?
Yeah, look, I think the important point there is, this loss of the moral compass. I don't think that South Africa holds a moral compass any longer, and I don't think that the West any longer see South Africa as being a moral compass in Africa. I think that it also, even the perception of South Africa being a regional hegemony is in remission. I mean, South Africa has very limited capacity to really project any sense of force or pursue interests much beyond its immediate sphere of interest across the rest of the continent. So I think what's important is this idea of friendship, and I think that one of the ways in which Russia has operated in Africa recently isn't state-to-state relationships, it's elite to elite, and specifically targeting countries where it sees that democratic backsliding and is trying to step into that void. Now, you can see in the Lavrov visit to Southern Africa, promises were made to other elites in the region. But in terms of South Africa, I think that you have this kind of tension where there are those within the elite who are more sympathetic, and there are more friendly relationships, and those within the elite where there aren't, which is where you see this kind of fracturing and kind of indecisiveness at the moment. But let's not forget, within that friendship, there have been ANC salaries being paid by Russian investors, particularly a manganese mine in South Africa, which is also causing question marks for the West, particularly as Western mines start focusing on things around critical minerals, of which manganese is one. So, in the West, people are joining dots and starting to say, look, see what's going on. And in South Africa, as been pointed out, some of that messaging has been clumsy.
Peter, both the other guests have mentioned that South Africa may have lost its moral compass or its capacity to lecture and hector the rest of the world on moral issues. Do you think anyone in Africa has picked that baton up yet? Is there a sort of leadership role? Well, clearly there's a vacancy, but is it Nigeria or is it Egypt? Who picks up that baton? It should be South Africa's. Surely it should be South Africa's to pick up again, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone there to pick it up. And I think that's why Russia is making its forays into Africa in sort of, to regimes in Central African Republic and also look at the sort of El Sisi regime in Egypt as well. But I think South Africa still has a lot of power. It still is a sub-imperial power. That's why, although America was annoyed, it was very quick to try and reassert its friendship, because South Africa is strategically, politically and economically still very important to US and European imperialism, as I'd characterize it. So I think South Africa is important. And actually South Africa still does in some ways dominate the continent economically. South African mining corporations are exploiting the continent, and other South African corporations are certainly taking over in terms of retail across huge swathes of the continent. So South Africa is still a very big important player in Africa.
Ebrahim, I'm going to put the same question to you if I can. Who do you think has the moral compass in Africa now? Who picks up that leadership baton if it's not South Africa, or should it be South Africa again?
Look, I think if you ask me,
yeah,
the only one that combines solid economics with a solid democratic infrastructure is South Africa. And it should be South Africa's. But at this moment, South Africa is fighting within 3 concentric circles. There is a battle within the ANC for hegemony. There is a battle that will play itself out in the elections next year for who is the governing party in South Africa. And then there is the battle for African and global, a role of moral authority and being able to speak with a clear voice. But I don't suspect we're going to get to the outer circle if we don't solve the inner circle first. And that's where a lot of people are concentrating winning the battle, especially around this, the one that has been ruptured deliberately by the USA, and put the cards on the table, place the ultimatum in front of South Africa, and then see how South Africa responds. So I think what the US has done is to try and launch the boil.
Ebrahim, Chris, Peter, thank you very much for joining me today, agreeing to talk about this subject. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today's show, though. But you can find more discussion and debate if you head on over to our YouTube channel. Head there, search for Roundtable TRT World. Click like and subscribe as well on the videos. But for now, from me here and all of the team, thank you for watching and goodbye.